He pointed a gun at my face by the lake and called me less than human. The radio on his shoulder crackled with a code that used to live in the same rooms I worked in, and every phone along the shore lifted like a field of small moons, catching the moment I decided not to raise my hands. I'm Rhea Cole, and before that afternoon, I was a ghost in my own country. Not famous, not heroic, just one of those erased names that still remembers everything. Fear showed up first like it always does, loud and messy, then it went quiet. And in that quiet, I heard my heartbeat ask a simple question. Who are you when somebody tells you what you're worth at the end of a barrel? Late sun on Beacon Lake, kids tossing bread joggers pretending not to stare, a breeze that kept changing its mind, and Officer Reed on the stone shore with his jaw locked so hard I thought his molars might fuse his breath, hitching as he shouted, "Hands up, don't move," like the words could turn my body into an object. I didn't move because I was brave. I didn't move because I was tired. Tired of looking at my own reflection in the water and seeing a case file with my face crossed out, tired of being the rumor people at Langley shared in a hallway. Whisper the woman who wouldn't keep cleaning blood off the truth. The light caught the little skull ink at the base of my neck. Tiny, almost pretty and meaner than it looks. The mark you get when the system erases you on paper but still wants to find you if you ever breathe the wrong way again. And you could see it hit him. That flash of recognition like a training slide came to life and stepped out into the open. His radio snapped. Maintain target L12. And it was like somebody else's hand tightened on the grip for him. You know what I mean? The old muscle memory kicking in the lesson where orders outrun oxygen, but he was shaking, and the gun clicked dry, just metal kissing metal, a sound no one forgets. Somebody on the far bank whispered, "He missed," somebody else shot back. No, it jammed. And the truth was simpler than either. The story jammed first. That's what really happened. I asked him the only thing that mattered. Do you see guilt in my hands, or just what you were trained to see? And he didn't answer with words. He answered with breath. One long breath that told me there was still a person under the badge. Then the sky got teeth. Rotors thumping tactical boots, chewing gravel-red strobes, skipping across the water. And Captain Hale stepped out like a man who thinks order owes him a favor, not even looking at me until he'd counted the phones. "Cuffer," he said. Simple as that, no reason offered, just the weight of a voice that expects you to kneel because it has never learned another way to stand. They zip-tied my wrists. Reed walked me toward a canvas tent that smelled like diesel and wet rope, and I could feel him flinch every time our shoulders brushed, like his conscience had a bruise he didn't want anyone to touch. Inside, radios hissed like snakes in a bucket. A laptop blinked awake with some mountain wallpaper from a place nobody in that tent had actually hiked, and Hale stood close enough for me to count the hairline dings on his sidearm as he asked, not tender, not curious, just clinical, "Who trained you?" Like he needed a name he could file under enemy. "I trained myself to stop mistaking silence for loyalty," I said. And yeah, that happened. I gave him the kind of sentence that turns into a stain you can't scrub out. They tied me to the center post while a medic, baby-faced, shaky hands, the kind of kid who still says "sir" to vending machines, dabbed at the graze on my cheek from a stray round when the chopper swooped low and he whispered, "I'm sorry," like confession. And I told him what I wish someone had told me younger. Don't be sorry, be awake. Outside the flap, the crowd breathed like a single lung, a rumble of voices, a woman saying, "We're live," another voice answering, "Hold the signal," and Hale barked for a kill switch that doesn't exist anymore, not when 1,000 pockets are full of cameras and courage. The medic spotted the skull tattoo and his pupils flared because he'd seen that mark on a projector once and hoped the slide would never walk into his tent. And I held his eyes and I asked, "You ever believe laws were made to protect people?" He swallowed. "Yes," and I said as gentle as I could manage. Then protect one, and his little belt knife sawed through the cord like the first honest breath that room had let itself take all day. Reed stepped in without even thinking. Not a speech, not a stance, just a man choosing where to stand. And Hale's face did this small twitch I recognized from men who are about to aim at something their training never warned them about. A conscience. On the table, the laptop woke, and I swear the cursor drifted to a folder all by itself. Purge City. Stamped red in that government font that tries to make horror look organized. And I clicked, and there it was. Lines and lines and lines, zones and neighborhoods and counts terminated. Processed, removed words that flatten a person until they fit into a cell on a spreadsheet, and it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It just sat there like gravity, and I turned the screen to the flap, and watched 100 lenses drink the proof. Hale shouted to kill the feed, and someone yanked a cable. The lamp died. The tent gasped, but the stream didn't care because the stream had already multiplied. 10 mirrors, 50, 100, a constellation of small eyes that refused to blink on command. They dragged me out into the light, and rain stung my lips, and a teen in a hooded sweatshirt, acne, bright as battle paint across his cheeks, held a phone like a torch and breathed. "My name's Jay, we've got you." And I said, "Don't do anything stupid." And he smiled like a kid whose favorite dare is being seen too late, and the way he said it would break your heart because innocence and stubbornness look the same from a distance. "Turn it off." An officer barked, and Jay said, "No, not a shout. Not a challenge, just that small square word that makes tyrants itch." And when the officer grabbed for the phone, I grabbed his wrist and the frame wobbled and caught my face full in the floodlight, and the crowd breathed like it was one animal, and a shot cracked the night, and Jay cried out, "Not down, just grazed blood running hot and bright to his wrist," and he kept filming anyway because once you see it, you can't unsee it, you know what I mean? In the chaos, Reed moved like a decision, pulled me into a city truck that coughed blue smoke, and we fishtailed out of the park with sirens nipping at our bumper, the windshield smeared with salt and rain, his shoulder bleeding into the seat like a red map of every line he'd just crossed, and he said through his teeth, "Lethal force authorized," and I said, "Then let them see who they're aiming at." We cut through a maintenance tunnel where the walls sweat even in January, the radio spitting our names like a prayer, said backwards, and on the other side the lake opened again, like a mouth that hadn't finished speaking. The shore lit by phones in hands that refused to slip, candle cups pooling wax beside slick shoes, and people shouted passwords, hotspots, workarounds, a living mesh knitting itself together faster than any jammer could rip it apart. We rolled to a stop where my first footprints had dried and cracked. I stepped out into light so white it made every face look holy and exhausted, and Hale aimed at my throat with that tiny red dot that thinks it's a god, and I told him the only sentence I had left. "If you shoot me, look at me when you pull the trigger, not at your orders," and he called me a traitor, like a man calls anything he can't own, and I told him he'd confused secrecy with safety, and yes, there's a difference. One hides the wound, the other heals it. He fired. That moment split like a cheap zipper, and Reed stepped into it with the dumb bravery of someone who finally hates his own silence more than he fears his own bleeding, and he went down. But he didn't leave. He stayed right there on the edge of the water, heaving air like it was borrowed, and the crowd didn't scatter. They lifted the light higher, and for a second the lake looked like the inverse of a night sky. Stars below, faces above, and every lens a verdict. And this is where people argue in the comments because what happened next depends which phone you watched. Some say a tactical rifle slipped. Some say a young agent's hand shook. Some say a miracle tugged the barrel 1 inch toward the water. All I know is a shot cracked and skipped the lake into wide ripples, and Hale staggered like pride does when it runs out of script, and the only thing louder than the rotors was a chant that learned how to breathe without a leader. Justice, justice, justice. Like waves hitting rock, not poetic, just physics. They took me to court 2 days later because the system loves a room it can lock, and the judge looked like a man who hadn't slept through a full night since someone first handed him a gavel. And outside the windows, the whole city knelt to charge phones off car batteries and hold them to the glass like candles at a hospital vigil. And the prosecutor tried to make it sound tidy, incitement disorder, national security. And I said the one thing that still fit in my mouth. I pointed a camera at a wound, and I refused to lie about whose hands were bloody. And he said, "Order needs obedience." And I said, if obedience means letting the state rename murder as paperwork, we don't share a dictionary. The judge asked if I had final words, and I told him I wasn't trying to be final. Nothing about this is. I just wanted the record to keep breathing if I couldn't. And he tapped the gavel 3 times, like maybe he was praying and he didn't read a verdict, because sometimes silence is the only honest thing a man can manage in a building that would rather measure him than hear him. And when they led me away, the hallway smelled like old rain and cheap disinfectant and something else. A rumor of change, maybe. That night we returned to the lake because stories like to end where they begin. The water flat as glass, the wind turning the last smoke from the convoy into a smudge on the sky, and people came without being told. Couples still in scrubs from hospital shifts, students with backpacks and hollowed-out eyes, a grandmother in a church hat that laughed at the weather. And nobody told anybody what to do. They just raised the light and breathed together, and little by little the mesh spun itself up again, the signal flickering alive like a stubborn pilot light. A kid I'd never seen before pulled something from the mud. a bullet smudged with dirt and a smear of someone's night, and he slipped it into his pocket and said, "Not dramatic, not for effect, just earnest, I'll keep it as a witness." And I swear I saw the future for a second, not tidy, not fair, just more of us refusing to give the moment back to the lie. Reed's shoulder healed slow and ugly the way true things do, and he stood up at a bank of microphones that fed into speakers someone had duct-taped together out of faith, and his voice shook in the first 3 words and found its legs on the 4th. "I chose justice. Not a sermon, not a slogan, a sentence a man can die with or live by." Hale didn't disappear from the world power. Seldom does. It just changed rooms, and the files people said were gone forever kept leaking like a bad roof. And by then it didn't really matter where the evidence came from because the city had already seen itself. And once a place sees itself clearly, it's hard to sell it. The old story at the old price. You want the twist in the middle the moment the night changed. It wasn't the first jam trigger or the first file on a screen. It was the first time a crowd learned to be its own network, when one phone died and 10 reached out to catch the signal. When a jammer that used to snap spines only made people more stubborn, when Hale's order to erase hit a wall of ordinary hands that refused to do the job for him, and that's the part I can't stop replaying because it means the breath lives where the orders don't. And if you want a neat ending, sorry, I don't have one, wins like this don't look like applause and confetti. They look like a city that doesn't sleep much for a while. It looks like nurses scrolling a clip between IV checks, like a construction worker wiping rain from a cracked screen with a sleeve that smells like dust, like a delivery driver pulling to the curb to lift his phone with everybody else. It looks like a judge who can't unhear a chant he never authorized. It sounds like a mother telling her kid. Sometimes adults forget what's right, and then lifting her camera anyway. People ask if I'm afraid now, and I tell them the truth. I'm scared of silence more than I'm scared of guns. Silence is expensive, and I paid too much for too long, and the bill they sent me had other people's names on it, and I'm done with that. So here's the part where I turn toward you, the screen, the room, the voice in your head that recognizes itself in mine, because maybe you have your own lake somewhere. A sidewalk outside a school board meeting, a hospital hallway at 3 a.m., a kitchen table where someone decided to make fear the house rule. And maybe you've been holding your breath a long time waiting for somebody else to say the thing out loud. And if that's you, let me say the simplest thing I know. Hold the signal, lift the light, breathe for what's right until it can breathe for itself. And if you think we went too far, say that too. If you think we didn't go far enough, welcome to the argument. If you think order means never being ashamed, tell me how you sleep if you think order means telling the truth, even when it shakes your job loose. Yeah, sit down. You're my people. Drop your city. Tell me where you were watching from. The first time you realized a lens tells a different story than a loudspeaker. Tell me a moment you filmed when you were told not to tell me the voice you heard when silence tried to hire you. And if you don't know what to write, type these 3 words, so the algorithm has to look us in the eye. Hold the signal. Then tell somebody you love that justice is still breathing, because tonight, because of you, it does.